Hello and welcome again. I'm so glad that you're all here. This event is hosted by Welcome.us. We are a nonprofit, non-government organization founded in 2021 to equip and empower Americans to participate in the work of welcoming newcomers, primarily through sponsorship. This is Welcome.us at the table, and my name is Krista Kartzen. I'm the Senior Director for Sponsorship Initiatives with Welcome.us. Today, we'll be kicking off our new webinar series, what we're calling, again, Welcome.us at the table, which is designed for sponsors and welcomers who care about private sponsorship pathways, the newcomers we've welcomed, and the stories of welcome that unite us. We'll start off today with policy updates from my colleague, Manpreet Theji, Welcome.us Senior Policy Counsel and Special Advisor. We'll then move into about 20 minutes of live Q&A with Manpreet and our returning special guest, Anne Smith, the Executive Director and Regulatory Counsel for the Ukraine Immigration Task Force. Throughout today's event, we invite you to share your policy or legal related questions about private sponsorship in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to tee them up for Manpreet or Anne during this extended time of live Q&A. But after we hear from them, we'll be joined by a friend of mine and mentor, Eileen Wilson with the National Immigration Forum. We've got a great discussion planned that roots these federal level policy changes in the local Northeast Ohio context. And we'll reserve a couple minutes at the end for sort of choose your own adventure activity based on how you're inspired today. So stay tuned for that. But for now, I'll hand it over to Manpreet for policy updates.
Thank you so much, Krista. Over the last few weeks, we have been tracking a lot of news coverage anticipated announcements from the U.S. Departments of State and Homeland Security regarding a possible travel ban, revocation of humanitarian parole, and other policy changes. Today, I will go over these policy announcements as well as possible forthcoming policy changes. To start off, a practice alert recently issued by the American Immigration Lawyers Association suggests that the U.S. government may announce the immediate termination of existing humanitarian parole for individuals entered the United States through the parole programs, which could include Uniting for Ukraine, as well as processes for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. If this occurs, we believe parolees who do not have another status, such as temporary protected status or TPS, or who do not already have a pending application for asylum or a different application status, will be considered by the administration to be out of status and unauthorized to be in the United States. If humanitarian parole is revoked, sponsored individuals could receive a notice to appear in immigration court, unless they have applied for or been granted a different immigration status, such as TPS or asylum. Receiving a notice to appear does not mean these individuals will be immediately or automatically deported. Lawsuits and federal regulation could change the timeline for when individuals are eligible to apply for alternative legal statuses, such as TPS and asylum. Given the uncertainty for the future of humanitarian parole and the various other alternative legal statuses, we strongly recommend that affected individuals seek competent legal counsel as soon as possible. We also encourage eligible individuals to apply for alternative legal status. However, as I will explain in a moment, there may be some restrictions to applying for alternative immigration applications in the future. So it is important as sponsors to be aware of these potential changes that may affect the newcomers in your community. This leads me to the next update, that we are currently tracking media reports that on February 14th, the Department of Homeland Security issued an internal memo suspending decision-making on all immigration applications filed by individuals who arrived in the United States through several sponsorship programs, including U4U and the processes for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. The directive indicates that the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, also known as USCIS, will not approve any alternative forms of legal status many sponsored individuals are seeking while this pause is in place. This includes applications filed for asylum, TPS, employment authorization documents, advanced parole travel, adjustment of status to permanent residence, naturalization, and all other applications filed to USCIS. Like I mentioned earlier, we continue to strongly recommend that sponsored newcomers apply for alternative legal status, including asylum if eligible, based on new guidance from legal experts. Sponsors can help by connecting newcomers with legal services. We will continue to monitor policy changes and share updated recommendations as they impact sponsorship programs. On the screen, you can see alternative legal status options that may be available for certain newcomers. You can find more information about these options on our webpage, which Jordan is dropping into the chat. But it is important to note that you should consult with legal counsel to determine what alternative legal statuses you are eligible for. Now we will transition to an update on refugee admissions. As we have previously shared, on January 20th, the U.S. government suspended the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, also known as USRAP, for a minimum of 90 days. This includes a halt on all refugee case processing and arrivals. More recently, on February 26th, the U.S. Department of State terminated all refugee reception and placement contracts, including the Welcome Corps program. This is heavy news for many of you, and I'll do my best to explain what we know so far. Policy changes are still being announced, and there is still active litigation on this. So there is a lot that we have yet to learn about what this will mean for sponsors and those we have planned to welcome. The termination of Welcome Corps last month was part of a more broad action by the federal government to end resettlement agency contracts. The suspension of USRAP, as well as the termination of Welcome Corps, is currently being challenged in court, and we will inform you of any updates as soon as we have them. In the most recent court document related to the case, the U.S. government stated that the Department of State is preparing a request for proposals for a new resettlement agency that could provide reception and placement services rather than restoring terminated contracts with existing resettlement agencies. It is unclear when or in what form USRAP programming will reopen and whether private sponsorship will be included in that programming. As of now, USRAP is not accepting any new referrals of refugees into the program. However, refugee cases that have already been referred into USRAP through a certified Welcome Corps application remain in the pipeline, though their processing is on hold and no flights have been scheduled for refugee arrivals. I want to clarify here that refugees who have already arrived in the United States are not at risk of losing their refugee status, but their access to certain services funded by the federal government may be affected. I understand this is challenging news for so many sponsors who were and are dedicated to welcoming newcomers into our families and communities. The Welcome Corps program proved Americans from both sides of the political aisle are committed to the work of welcome, and we know so many of you will have questions about what this means for private sponsorship, Welcome Corps, and refugee resettlement more generally. As a reminder, we invite you to share your questions in the Q&A function below, and we will try to answer you directly either in the chat or in our Q&A time shortly. You may also find our FAQ page about Welcome Corps and USRAP useful, which my colleague will drop into the chat. Finally, we're tracking recent media reports suggesting that the US government may soon announce a travel ban that bars citizens from specific countries from entering the United States. The latest reports indicate that several nationalities that were previously eligible for private sponsorship, including Afghanistan, Cuba, and Venezuela, and several others, could be on the travel ban list, which would mean these individuals could not enter the US even if resettlement pathways are reinstated. It is unclear if an exception would be made for special immigrant visa holders, which is a visa granted under specific circumstances to Afghans or Iraqis who were employed by or on behalf of the US government in their home country. As of now, Afghan special immigrant visa holders are still able to arrive in the US if they make their own travel arrangements. To be very clear, as of now, the travel ban is not in effect, and it has not been formally announced. There is still a lot we don't know, and we will continue to provide updates on our policy update page when we know more.
Thank you, Manpreet. We've received really good questions, and we'll address as many questions in the chat as we can, and verbally as well. But joining us to help answer your legal questions on behalf of the Ukraine Immigration Task Force is Anne Smith. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we'll start off with a commonly asked question from humanitarian parole sponsors and newcomers about applying for alternative legal status options in light of the complexity of policies at the moment. As Manpreet mentioned, recent media reports indicate that there is a suspension on decision-making for all immigration applications submitted by individuals who arrived in the U.S. through humanitarian parole sponsorship. This includes temporary protected status, asylum, employment authorization documents, and others. And what advice is the Ukraine Immigration Task Force giving to sponsored individuals who are trying to file immigration applications given the suspension?
First, we recommend that parolees and their sponsors seek knowledgeable legal counsel. This will help them assess their options and their risks. We're also recommending that parolees who have not yet filed but are considering filing applications such as TPS, asylum, or adjustment of status, go ahead and file them because there could be advantages to proceeding with these applications even while the administrative pause is in effect. So as of now, the administrative pause is only a suspension, not a permanent closure of these avenues to parolees. So although USCIS officers are not allowed to issue any decisions to parolees, it is possible that parolees who recently filed applications or plan to file applications to USCIS could potentially receive these decisions in the future. And moreover, filing certain immigration applications, such as TPS and asylum applications, can stop a person from accruing unlawful presence, even if it doesn't grant parolees a lawful status. So, for example, filing for asylum or adjustment of status allows the applicant to remain in the United States while their application is pending. While it doesn't give them a new lawful status, it does give them lawful presence. And this can preserve their right to apply for future statuses, as well as help protect them from removal if they are questioned by immigration officers.
Thank you, Anne. What I'm hearing from you and what is consistent with guidance that we've shared previously is that it's really important to seek legal counsel in navigating this new environment. We had a question come in just now that says, no one in our group knows an immigration lawyer. How can we find a competent expert lawyer to consult for the Ukrainian family we sponsored?
There are two potential resources that I would recommend. One is to visit the American Immigration Lawyers Association website. It's AILA, AILA, and you can look up immigration attorneys in various areas and also see which areas of immigration they specialize in. For families who are seeking Ukrainian or Russian speaking attorneys, we do publish a list of attorneys who are accepting inquiries from the public on our own Ukraine Immigration Website Task Force, Ukraine Immigration Task Force website, which is ukrainetaskforce.org.
Excellent. Thank you. And I know we've got our alternative legal status option explainer in the chat that has more resources, including the AILA resource you mentioned, and we'll also be dropping the Ukraine Immigration Task Force resource in the chat for folks to access easily. This question, Manpreet, is for you. We've received a few of these. What should I do if the funds that my group raised to sponsor a family who has not arrived?
Thank you for that question, Krista. So depending on your circumstances, there are a few ways you may approach handling the funds you raised to sponsor a family who has not yet arrived, whether through the Welcome Corps program or a humanitarian parole sponsorship program. You may decide to keep the funds you raised on hold until there's greater clarity about what happens with sponsorship programs going forward. Or you may consider refunding donations back to your donors. Alternatively, you might repurpose your donation for another cause, such as supporting newcomers who are here. In this case, you will want to inform each donor about how their donations would be repurposed and then give them the opportunity for a refund if they prefer. If you raised funds through the GoFundMe fundraising platform, their team may reach out to you in the coming weeks with more instructions about your options. And you can always contact GoFundMe care team through your account if you have any questions.
Thank you, Manpreet. We'll go back to Anne. We just got a question about, do you recommend Ukrainians obtain power of attorney to handle asset distribution if they need to leave without time or ability to dispense their assets?
We are recommending that all parolees, including Ukrainians, and not only parolees, but people who arrived on other statuses that are a little bit uncertain, we do recommend that they create an emergency preparedness plan, which includes power of attorney, custody of any children, any other assets, and issues that they want to address. It's best to do this in advance. And we actually have some resources on our website that link to a guide in different languages available for emergency planning. So I would be happy to share that link as well.
Thank you very much, Anne. And I've got one more question for you for now. I think you hinted at it, but I think, this has come up quite a bit. And so I want to make sure that we have clarity for folks. The question is that the Ukrainian family I helped had TPS through April 19th and submitted paperwork to re-register for the TPS designation through October 2026. Of course, the re-registration paperwork has not been processed. So do they have legal status so long as they applied, or what does that look like for them?
As of now, Ukraine's current designation runs at least through April 19th, 2025. And as of now, the published extension that was published in the Federal Register on January 17th is still in effect. However, as the question noted, until an individual's re-registration is actually approved, they're only going to be protected on TPS through the term that's specified in the redesignation of April 19, 2025. So because a lot of these extensions were only published on January 17th, and the 60-day window, only started after the publication date. Unfortunately, a lot of people who re-registered or applied to re-register have not received those decisions. So what I will tell you is, legally speaking, the TPS protection only runs through the end of the protection granted, and until the extension itself is granted to each individual, unfortunately, they will not have TPS status after April 19th. So filing for TPS does not grant a new status or any additional protection, but having a pending TPS application could help, prove that somebody is in the pipeline waiting for a decision. And it does stop the clock on their what is called unauthorized presence, which is not the same as unlawful status, unfortunately.
Thank you, Anne. And what we've been sharing in these webinars, so I know you're all familiar, we're really in a window of time where there's policies being developed. Obviously, we're giving updates regularly, but that means that they're still also being developed and determined. And we've gotten a few questions about this bill that Senator Durbin introduced, providing protection for Ukrainians who came through U4U. Manpreet, do you have any guidance on this bill? Can you share a little bit more about it?
Thanks, Krista. We are closely tracking the bipartisan legislation Protecting Our Guests During Hostilities in Ukraine Act that Senator Durbin introduced this month that provides protection for those who are already provides temporary guest status to Ukrainians and their immediate family members who are already here through U4U. And this bill allows Ukrainians to stay and work in the United States until the Secretary of State determines that the hostility in Ukraine has ceased and it is safe for them to return. At this time, we welcome sponsors to reach out to their members of Congress using our contacting your representative guide to advocate for legislation that will provide individuals here protection through protection for private sponsorship program parolees. So we encourage you to use this tool, and we really encourage you to express your concern for legislation that could support those here through private sponsorship programs.
I see. And we've got a related question about contacting our representatives. Someone wrote in saying that they've been sending letters to their House of Representatives, senators, and Department of State, and we received the same answers. The new administration suspended those programs. What else can we do?
I completely understand, and I know how frustrating it can be to continue receiving the same answer, but it is really important
Your
to
shoelaces are untied,
continue
both of them.
registering and expressing your ongoing interest by raising the issue again and again. And your voice means that your representative knows that their constituents really care and are still asking them to do something. So please don't stop and continue doing continue putting those requests in, because numbers do matter in this situation.
Thank you, Manpreet. We're going to go back to Anne for a moment as well. We've got a new question for you. An attorney for the Ukrainian family I sponsored said they do not have a strong enough case to apply for asylum, but another attorney said they should still apply anyway, and we are confused. Do you have a recommendation for how to interpret conflicting advice?
I will say that asylum is an extremely fact-specific, circumstance-specific claim. So without knowing any details at all, or even knowing, partial details, but not understanding the evidence fully, nobody can really advise a family as to whether or not to seek asylum. Probably in this situation, it might just make sense to discuss, the family's goals and to understand, whether they do wish to stay in the United States long term. And if so, then maybe try to understand, if there are strategies that could work for them. I just unfortunately can't comment on the advice of attorneys, or on a specific case.
No, thank you. That's helpful, Anne. Manpreet, we've got more questions about refugee resettlement and the Welcome Corps. This one specifically says, what do we expect? given that the end of the 90-day Welcome Corps pause is approaching, we recall January 20th, the executive order said that there'd be a 90-day review period and then a report would be issued. We're coming up against that 90-day mark in the coming weeks. What can we expect after that?
Thank you for the question. So as we know, the State Department is expected to draft and submit a report to the White House regarding the future of the U.S. refugee admissions program, including Welcome Corps. So the pause remains in effect until the president lifts the pause at this time.
We've got another question about a few actually about the Welcome Corps. Here's another one. This sponsor contacted our representative in Texas, but they informed us that they cannot inquire about the Welcome Corps because it's not a federal agency. So given that, even though it's a program of a federal agency, do you have any advice for this sponsor?
Yes, thank you. So Welcome Corps is a program administered from the Department of State as part of the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. So it is a federal program under the jurisdiction of a federal agency. Some representatives and some staffers who work for these representatives may not be fully familiar with the nuances of the program and understanding that it is actually issued by a federal agency. And the more information and requests they receive, the more they can learn about the program. And this is one of the reasons it's important to keep contacting your representative. So I think, encourage and educate the members and explain to them what this program is and how it is actually falling into a federal agency's jurisdiction.
Thank you. And this one's for you. We've got a question that came in similarly about contacting the federal government. This question asks, who should we reach out to for official information regarding our specific application? The sponsor says our representative mentioned they could only inquire about USCIS cases like the I-130 or I-140. Does the Welcome Corps coordinate with USCIS, or are these entirely separate processes?
So I can't really speak to, I'm not sure that I understand the question, but if I understand correctly, this is a Welcome Corps sponsorship question, which goes to the U.S. State Department, and I don't know if Manpreet wants to address this one, or we're asking more from the USCIS side of things, because I can't really comment on how to look into the status of that, or maybe I'm not understanding the question.
As I understand the question, I'm reading it right now. I think it's important to understand that your representative can conduct a congressional inquiry on cases like your parole application or I-130s or I-140s. So Welcome Corps is actually coordinated with the Department of State, like I mentioned previously. And so you should contact your representative and ask about a congressional inquiry with the State Department, given that it's your refugee application. And so that would be with the State Department, not with USCIS. And I hope that clarifies the answer.
Thank you, Manpreet. We know that at a certain point in the process, there is interagency collaboration for refugee, vetting and verification, but at the application point, any Welcome Corps information would be held by the State Department as far as that processing goes. So sounds like you're doing the right thing as a sponsor, and as Manpreet shared, continue to reach out is our best advice, I think. Manpreet, we have a question coming in on what you shared about the Afghan SIV holders. The question says, will Afghan special immigrant visa holders who who have applied, we've applied to sponsor through sponsor circles receive the same benefits that they received prior to the pause. For example, those who would they receive the same like reception and placement service benefits?
This is a really important question. While Afghan SIV holders are able to arrive in the United States, they need to pay for their own flights. However, SIV holders are still eligible for benefits, including Social Security numbers, employment authorization, food stamps, Medicaid, and cash assistance, though some of these benefits will actually vary by state.
Got it. Thank you. This question came in for you, Manpreet, as well. Is there a predicted notification timeline for Ukrainians who came through Uniting for Ukraine if their status is revoked? For example, is there a 90-day notice or something similar to when TPS was revoked for some Venezuelans? And this is open, Manpreet or Anne, as you're available to speak into this.
Thank you. And feel free to add. Right now, we're tracking media reports that the revocation for U could come as soon as April, but we do not know that for sure. And we do recommend preparing for it sooner rather than later. We do believe that there will not be a notice and comment period or a grace period before the status is revoked.
I concur with Manpreet on that assessment.
Right. Thank you. Let's see, I don't see any more. Let's see. Looking at your really good questions, and we've got a team of probably about 8 people in the background answering your questions. So please keep them coming. I want to mention even now we're going to take just another couple minutes to answer them live on the screen, but please continue to share your questions, and we're going to continue to answer them using that Q&A function in the back. So I think we've got a couple questions more about that travel ban, Manpreet, that you mentioned, that it hasn't been announced, but it's something we're anticipating based on media reports. Can you tell us, would the travel ban affect refugees who were previously sponsored and arrived in the US, for example, a Syrian refugee family?
That's an important question. Thank you, Krista. No, the travel ban does not affect refugees from any country if they have already arrived and are currently in the United States. If a refugee is planning to leave the US soon, they should consult with legal counsel before making travel plans.
Thank you, Manpreet. And our last live answer goes to you, Anne. Want to make sure that folks who arrived on humanitarian parole have your best advice from the Ukraine Immigration Task Force about what they can do during these uncertain times.
Apologies, I forgot to unmute. So I think that's a very valid question right now. We are advising parolees and also other individuals to essentially be prepared and take all the measures they can. So as we mentioned earlier, it's important to seek knowledgeable legal counsel to assess your options and your risks. We also discussed the advantages of filing certain applications even while the USCIS administrative pause is in effect, because this might offer additional protections. And there are other measures that parolees can potentially take. One is to carry your attorney's business card or signed representation form with you. Another is to carry a paper copy of the documents showing your valid status in the United States, since having a valid status is the most secure situation. This can be an I-94 arrival departure record, an approval letter from USCIS, or an unexpired work permit showing your valid status. We also recommend carrying evidence of your residence in the United States for at least 2 years if you've been here that long. If you have applied for another status, such as asylum or TPS, carry paper evidence of the pending application for the other status. This can be a USCIS filing receipt, as an example. But know that a pending application is not a guarantee. So you'll want to have a conversation with your legal counsel about how to best protect yourself. And if you would like to access Know Your Rights materials, our Ukraine Immigration Task Force has developed a guide that's available in English, Ukrainian, and Russian, which we can drop into the chat now.
Thank you very much, Anne. And I know we'll also accompany that with an AILA resource with other languages as well. And really appreciate Anne and Manpreet, both of you. Thank you for your time and for sharing your expertise with us. And thank you both also for staying on to answer additional questions that come in through the Q&A function throughout the rest of our webinar. And if you'd like to connect with more of those helpful resources that Anne and her team at the Ukraine Immigration Task Force has developed, we'll drop a link to their website in the chat as well. And while we aim to bring you accurate and timely policy updates and answer your questions, we also recognize the importance of and the opportunity to ground these federal policies in the experience of real communities across the country. And that's truly the heart of why we launched Welcome.us at the table. For us, meeting at the table means nourishment, encouragement, community building, and idea sharing. And that's the spirit we want to foster. And that's why I'm so pleased to introduce to you my friend and mentor, Eileen Wilson, to share about some community conversations and support she's seen blossom in Northeast Ohio in recent weeks. Eileen has worked with the refugee and immigration population in Cleveland for the past 20 years, most recently through her work as the executive director of Yamana and as a mobilizer for the National Immigration Forum. But before Eileen joins us, we'll show a short local news clip that aired earlier this month featuring her and my mom, Mary Ann Cartson. The story specifically highlights the effects that these new policies are having on sponsored Ukrainians in Northeast Ohio, but much the same can be said for sponsored newcomers and communities all across the country. So let's take a look. I'm so sorry, Ella. It looks like the volume is a little bit challenging. Let's see if we can make a correction, but if not, we can, no, we don't hear it very well. No, I'm so sorry. I think we should maybe just jump right into Eileen and we could share that news clip in the email. So no worries on that front. Let's just jump right in and introduce Eileen. Eileen, welcome to the table. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Krista. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, as we'll all see when we watch the video clip, Katie Usen, the reporter in the news clip, said that this issue of supporting newcomers is deeply personal for a lot of people in Northeast Ohio. Can you tell us more about how Clevelanders are affected by policy changes and the uncertainty of the moment?
Yes, that's a great question. We were really very pleased to see that the news wanted to share this story, that they wanted to go into the community and talk to people who were affected. And so it was a real pleasure to do that. The way that people have been affected that I've seen is really dependent on their role. Some people, sponsored people that came from Ukraine or might have come from Venezuela, and they're not sure what's going to happen. And so they've been affected because they're feeling the uncertainty of the families they're working with. They don't know what's going to happen. And so I think that uncertainty is playing itself out in the communities. I've also seen people who just are frustrated because they want to welcome. They have neighbors, they have people in their churches, people in their community who are affected, but they're not quite sure what to do. And so I see frustration. It's one step away from actually being a sponsor. And then I just see, the average person that's not sure what's going on. And I think that they are seeking to find information, which is why it's great that webinars like this exist. Helps them understand what they can do.
Thank you so much, Eileen. And for awareness, we'll add a link to the National Immigration Forum's valuable resources page in the chat. So that, thank you for that. Can you tell us, how would you say that Americans in Northeast Ohio are showing their support for newcomers in sponsorship pathways?
Yes, I'm very proud of our community. I know that Cleveland is a very diverse community and maybe larger than the community some of the people on the webinar are from. You know, we have a lot of people here, but I think what we're doing here will actually translate to any town in America. I see people that were going to be sponsors. They're people they were going to bring, maybe aren't able to come yet, but they are reaching out to family members of that the group that was going to come, and they're building relationships. So maybe they're not going to meet their person yet, but going to meet people in their community, and so that's been great. I've seen people do things like just send one email, and one email to a friend sent an email to her church to just ask the pastor, you know, how do I feel about this? Does the church feel about what's going on? What's our status? You know, how can we help? What can we do? And that one email started a whole chain of events that have the church doing now an interview and doing a class on the current situation. So one person's email started a whole chain of events. It's never too small or never too big. I've also seen in some of the coffee shops in Cleveland, they are holding conversations just for the people who are either in that neighborhood or go and frequent that coffee shop. They can come and talk about it, see what we can do as a community. How can we be welcoming? How can we make sure that people feel like they are, we want them to be here and that they are part of our community? So there's a lot of different ways I'm seeing people reach out, big ways and small ways, and just raising their voice.
That's so exciting, Eileen. Thank you. You probably don't know it, but you were the first person truly to introduce me to refugee newcomers. And you helped me to begin to understand why sometimes people are forced to flee their homes. So, in many ways, we're here today because of an invitation that you extended to me well over a decade ago. And it's truly a testament to what you said, that even one email can make a difference. Since you've been doing this work for 20 years, I'm curious if you've been surprised at all about the responses you've been getting when you approach the topic of sponsorship and immigration issues in your community.
You know, one of the surprises have to do with the one email that, you know, brought the chain of events. I was surprised that the church she spoke to, who hadn't spoken on immigration in over 20 years, was now raising their voice. So I'm surprised to see that we are seeing movement and we are seeing people almost understand in a different way that this is affecting us as a country. It's affecting individuals, it's affecting people we know. So I'm always surprised when a new voice enters the marketplace of ideas. So I think that's a really big way. You know, I'm also just very surprised that people are very open to being part of the conversation. As I have myself held webinars, I've seen people come that normally wouldn't be part of a conversation on immigration, but they are taking the time out of their life to learn and to listen and to add their voice. So I think those are great ways that people have surprised me in very big ways.
It's really encouraging that in the moment of, so much talk about immigration, that people are genuinely very curious and have been surprising allies and curious about what you have to say. And so thank you, as you do your own webinars, thank you for joining us as well here. And I've got one more question for you. We'd love to hear what advice you have for welcomers who are ready and eager to engage their communities in conversations about this topic. How could they even go about getting started?
Yeah, there's some great ways. I have seen popping up I've seen book circles where people are inviting their friends to maybe study a book written by a refugee or immigrant, or maybe the story of what it is to come as an immigrant, and to use someone else's story, which is much less divisive. If you read a story of somebody's experience, I think it brings people together because they realize there are a very human factor to each story, that people went through a lot to get here. And they came, one of my favorite quotes is, "Nobody leaves home unless home is in the mouth of a shark." And people only leave their home uh, for reasons that force them to leave. And I think something like a book club shows you a different way to see that, as well as having a movie night. There are a lot of different movies. One of my favorite is God Grew Tired of Us, which is a great story about the Sudanese lost boys coming and being resettled to America. It very much shows the day by day of what it meant for one culture to come to another culture and how isolated and alone they felt. I think showing something like that will also be a catalyst for people to go out and meet people in their community who might be different, to just start a conversation and give them a smile. I think it has a lot more meaning than we think it does.
I think that's brilliant, Eileen. I love that show, don't tell philosophy. And showing is by, it's extending an invitation, screening a film, sharing your own personal experience. And so that so resonates, I think, with so many on the screen here who have that personal experience and who want to really capture the attention and share and show their community what inspires them about welcoming newcomers. So I want to thank you for your time, Eileen, not only the time you spent with us, but also for your work welcoming newcomers and educating communities around Ohio. Thank you for your work. So if anyone on, who is viewing today, if you're inspired by something that Eileen or any of our other speakers shared, we're intentionally ending a couple minutes early to offer the time and space to think about how you might carry this conversation forward in your own community. For you, that might mean sending a quick email to stories@welcome.us to schedule a 15-minute storytelling consultation meeting where our storytelling team will go over your outreach goals, your experience, and offer resources to help you craft and share your personal story. Instead of engaging the media, maybe you'd prefer to contact your representatives and let them know just how meaningful sponsorship has been to you. If that's the case, take a look at our resource in the chat and use the form and draft messaging to send them an email or give them a call. And if you're looking to engage your community more on a personal level, consider calling a friend and asking what they think about hosting an event. You might take Eileen's suggestion of hosting a book club or movie night, or even a potluck meal with a simple but intentional discussion around what welcoming means in your community. You might be surprised at who accepts your invitation. So if you're looking for more inspiration than that, take a look at our guide to supporting sponsorship linked in the chat, which offers some additional ideas depending on how much time you have. And of course, I hope you'll join us for the next Welcome.us at the Table event on Thursday, April 17th. You can register by clicking the link in the chat, and the link will also be included in an email you'll receive tomorrow morning, along with some of the other resources we've shared today. We'll close again in just a few seconds so you have some time to go over your next steps. But before you do, would you consider responding to the short survey that will pop up on your screen once the webinar ends? Your feedback helps us remain responsive and relevant to your work of welcoming, and it's your work that inspires us every single day. After you complete that survey, go forth, take the next 10 minutes to email us to book a storytelling consultation, contact your representatives, or call a friend, and join us again here at the table on April 17th. Until then,